When we are doing the will of our true self, we are inevitably doing the will of the universe. In magic, these are seen as indistinguishable. That every human soul is in fact one human soul. It is the soul of the universe itself, and as long as you are doing the will of the universe, then it is impossible to do anything wrong.
Greetings. It is I, Keats Ross, host of the PRAGMAGICK podcast, a podcast about the confluence of art and metaphysics and the creative process. And what's a bigger creative process than a lifelong journey and pursuit and seeking of who we are? I'd like to introduce today's guest, Harv Bishop of harvbishop.com. I think he, along with writers like Mitch Horowitz and Royce Christian, are single-handedly reforming New Thought. And New Thought was a metaphysical, practical magic movement that's really gained momentum, I would say, in the New Age era. And it's finding its renaissance, but not without some growing pains. And I talked with Harv about where New Thought's been, where it can go, how chaos magic can help support and uplift and evolve New Thought. We also share an incredible trajectory ourselves, both coming from very diverse religious backgrounds, very diverse spiritual backgrounds, that all kind of conspire to this conversation and who we are today. And for this week's episode, I divined the episode art with the Disruption Generator. You can find more at thedisruptiongenerator.com, and I'll show you the cards I pulled. The first, goat. Second, iguana. And the third and most important, misshapen. Now you'll notice I used misshapen image as the episode art for today because Harv Bishop is reforming New Thought. It has kind of grown. It has been misshapen over time. It has come from organic absolutes like goats or iguanas maybe, and has turned into something, a new thought form, a new egregore, a new servitor in and of itself. And it's time to reconfigure the DNA of New Thought. So if you want to learn more about the Disruption Generator, grab a book at disruptiongenerator.com. It's written by Eric J. Millar and put out through our art collective, wethehallowed.org. Without further ado, here is my conversation with New Thought reformer, Harv Bishop. We are here with Harv Bishop. It's good to see you, Harv. Thank you for taking the time to do this. I consider you a figurehead in what I would call the Reformation of New Thought. And I'd love to just, figure out where New Thought is going, where it's been, what can be better with it. And I thought we'd start with your background and what brought you into this practical mysticism almost.
Well, a couple of threads there, Keats. I grew up in a family that explored spirituality very widely. My parents were nominal Catholics, but they were what I would call social Catholics as opposed to cradle Catholics. My dad had had a number of psychic experiences throughout his life, my mom as well. So they definitely knew well that, there was something, beyond the ordinary, something beyond what would be in a traditional. My dad studied the works of Edgar Cayce quite extensively. My mom read New Thought pioneers like Joel Goldsmith and Ralph Waldo Trine, so I was steeped in that as I grew up. My grandmother, heavily into the occult, she read Jung's Memories, Dreams, Reflections autobiography out loud to me when I was around 12. And I was utterly captivated by it, which was kind of odd for a kid. But so just surrounded by it throughout my life. And when I was about 18, I went to Mile High Church of Religious Science in Denver after I got out of high school. The Mass just wasn't, the Catholic Mass wasn't doing it for me anymore. My favorite words were, the Mass has ended, go in peace. And I was like, right, I'm out of here. Mile High was very refreshing. It was open to all religions, and I understood that well from my family background, and I enjoyed it a lot.
Are you familiar with Marilyn Ferguson at all? The Aquarian
Yes.
Conspiracy?
Yes.
So I grew up for a time. My father was a part of that compound in L.A.
Oh, wow.
And actually, PRAGMAGICK, the title, comes from a Marilyn Ferguson edited book from the Brain Mind Bulletin, which was a New Thought zine.
Right.
So I thought you might get a kick out of that. There's some tethers,
Yeah, no, that's very cool.
Yeah.
I will remember that book. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, it did a lot for me as a kid being around it. So we share similar backgrounds, and that it was kind of always there. It was always in the peripheral. And I was wondering, you had mentioned in a biography piece that was it a Hasidic Jew had taught you a lot of like Jewish mysticism, and that's what kind of started?
Yeah, that was I'd been in New Thought for probably about 20 years by that point when I discovered the rabbi. Again, there was a Carl Jung connection because he was a guest speaker at the Denver's Jung Society.
Wow.
And I was so pumped. A little bit of background here, too. My dad died when he was fairly young, mid-60s. And the last 2 years of his life, he did a deep, deep dive into the Kabbalah and reading a lot of rabbis in Jewish mysticism. And he would do these extemporaneous homilies at, family dinners and get-togethers and things, and I'd be always a little bit embarrassed. And I think, well, that's interesting, it's cool, but hey, I'm New Thought, I know everything. And then when he passed, I thought, what was it that drove him? What grabbed him so much that this, really consumed the last 2 years of his life? And so when I heard the rabbi was coming to the Jung Society, I was like, yeah, I'm there. And I was so really excited, and I drug a friend down there. It turned out we were a week early, and there was no one there. So we came back the next week. I heard him, and that started a 25-year and still going opportunity to go to his classes. And as a Gentile, as an ex-Catholic, his openness to, having me there and including me. I mean, wow. I mean, what an incredible gift. And I think the one thing he said that night that grabbed me more than anything, and I've tried to live my life by it, he said that truth can be viewed two ways. You can see it as an open circle, or you can see it as a pinpoint. If you see it as an open circle, then there's room to disagree, there's room to share perspectives. Everybody's perspective is important, and it takes a communal effort to explore these deep mysteries and how to live in the world in order to really come to a closer approximation. And that's, in his view, that's something, and in Judaism, mystical Judaism, that's something that always evolves. It doesn't get stuck.
Right.
So in his approach, there's real fundamentalism. Then there's the point, the tiny point. And it's the truth. I've got it. Anybody else comes up here and claims to have the truth, I'm pushing them off this tiny point. Mm-hmm. So the open circle is just an absolutely great model. I try to, and I resonated to it because my spiritual background and in my family was this kind of open circle with multiple perspectives. When my dad's going to Mass one day and reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead the other, you just naturally resonate with that. So the rabbi's classes have been a really great gift.
Yeah, it's funny. I share that as well. I grew up for the first half of my childhood pretty Catholic, and the second half Jewish. And one thing that I remember that resonated with me much more with the kind of the dichotomy between Catholicism and Judaism is how they treat like excommunication, or there's excommunication in the Catholic Church, which is they just take your right away from talking to God somehow. They take that away. But in Judaism, the worst that can happen to you is they kick you out of the community. And to me, that's always resonated more within this kind of shared, paradigm with people and belief, how much deeper that is to me, that they say, like what's between you and your God, or between you and God, is between you and God. It's almost pragmatic in that sense too. So that's always stayed with me.
Yeah, and I mean, on the pragmatic piece, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that really, is people often ask, why have you studied this for so long? And I can't really come up with an answer. I mean, I think there's a past life connection. I think there's a lot of different things, but it's the only way I can describe it is like I was suddenly being given fresh oxygen to breathe.
Yeah.
And it was just so amazing that way. And to the pragmatic piece, I mean, it's the most earthy mysticism I've been exposed to.
Yeah.
Because everything is, yes, you touch the transcendent, but you don't touch the transcendent to zone out. It's like, it's touching it to how you live. And that, the Rabbi Howard Hoffman always talk, and he has a cool website if anyone wants to check it out. But he always says it's like every human being is born with 2 coins in their pocket. One says, "I am but dust and ashes," and the other side says, "The world was made just for me." And you've got to grasp that paradox, the between those 2 coins, and
contradiction almost.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I came to realize that new thought was very, very good on the world was made just for me.
Right.
But they don't grasp the "I am but dust and ashes" piece.
That's what I mean, that's kind of the apex of what I want to get into with you today, is kind of that the institutionalized new thought versus, what new thought can be and how it will grow and become something new. Do we call it something different? Do we evolve it? Like, where do we go with it from now? But I think first, let me circle back, and excuse me for the meandering questions. But what brought you into like a new thought service? Like, what did that look like?
It was, at that time, it was the 1970s. I'd just gotten out of high school. It looked a lot like a traditional church service. And that I found out that was by design. I mean, they wanted it to, they sang the Our Father, they had songs, a sermon. And they were wanting to give people a bridge so that when they came out of more traditional religions, they'd feel comfortable. And there was basically 2 messages at the core of New Thought. The one I like the most is that there's truth in all religions and we can learn from all religions. And then there's the mind power, the mind metaphysics that you create and shape your own reality. And that's where I think things get a little problematic. And as we can talk about in a bit, where I think chaos magic is a really good corrective, because there it's like you can nudge the odds a certain direction, but you don't create everything that happens in your life. And
right. I also think that's a big fault of where chaos magic is heading to. I think it's turned into very much a self, what do you call it? It's a selfish, kind of trajectory for a lot of practitioners, and that there's not a lot of reverence given to the pieces they take.
Yeah, I can see that.
And so with that, what are some of the things in New Thought that made you kind of taken aback or want to point out, where it should go, where to evolve it?
Oh gosh, I mean, a lot of things. I began to question probably even 20 years ago, and as I got more deeply into study with the Rabbi Hoffman, I began to realize that, as the rabbi always says, it's like you don't want to treat God as a cosmic Pez dispenser,
Right.
That there's more to our experience in this world than trying to just get everything we want. And there's in a certain superficiality, in New Thought, you're looking for the parking genie. And there's nothing wrong with looking for the parking genie, but, there's more to it. Now, I want to be fair here, because there are within New Thought, and even within my old Thai church, my home church, I mean, there are some ministers and practitioners, different people that are extraordinarily deep. I mean,
Right.
Reverend Dr. Patty Lucas is one good example. She's gone deeply into Native American spirituality. She does sun dances, vision quests, and not just weekend workshop stuff. I mean, she's working with actual Native peoples on that. So,
I was going to ask how what the appropriation kind of influx is like, and what are the the rough edges of bringing in those certain things too, because I know that's a big thing these days.
Yeah, and Dr. Patty's history on that's goes back over 20 years. I mean, she's not just gone to workshop with people who have appropriated that kind of thing.
Right.
She's
right.
doing the real deal. What you mentioned, though, I mean, is a problem, and with the sort of shop and
it's a big problem in chaos magic too. I would
think, yeah, I would think, and I've noticed that selfish trajectory that you've talked about. That's definitely an issue that I think I picked up with, my initial foray into it. But still, I think people like Gordon White, Pete Carroll, he's a bit dogmatic but interesting.
Yeah.
I've seen some really interesting people there. But yeah, so I mean, I think there's genuine, sincere people that are open to pursuing those paths. But then there's also dogmatic fundamentalists, like there are in any human organization.
Right, and I didn't mean to, say that all New Thought is institutionalized, or even institutionalization is bad,
Right.
in a certain way. But I know that recently you have posted harvbishop.com. You've had these amazing articles. I call them incendiary because they're very much telling of like almost a systemic problem in any kind of organized religion, or any institutionalized thing where there's not a way to deal with transgressions with, the ministers almost.
Right. Yeah. And that, I mean, if New Thought has a huge Achilles heel, it's in victim blame.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the chaos magic can open up. If people feel like they're nudging odds in their direction, as opposed to every little thought literally becomes true.
Right.
When my wife and I, even to the point where we experimented with chaos magic, was she had emergency surgery a couple of years ago, nearly died, and then it took 3 or 4 surgeries to correct that. And when you're in a tradition that says, well, why'd that happen? Well, it was in your consciousness. Terrible thing happens, you're out picturing your consciousness, and then immediately people feel guilty. What is in my consciousness is caused this to happen to me?
Right.
And I mean, that's a very simplistic view of things, and certainly, again, not all New Thought ministers would embrace that, but a good chunk of them do. And it's very easy then to blame others for their suffering. Even now, like you'll hear a minister, say, there's this idea that New Thought needs to work for social justice, and I think that's a good thing. And that's kind of on the progressives, but so they have the slogan, it's time to create a world that works for everyone. And then, you'll get some dyed-in-the-wool fundamentalist that says, well, we already have a world that works for everyone. Well, honestly, you can go over to Asia and tell some child that's been sold into child sex slavery that they already have a world that works for them, that somehow that child thought their way into these horrific circumstances.
Yeah.
And it's just bullshit. So, and I think a lot of people eventually come to that point. So with my wife's job layoff, with the health, all that stuff, it's like we were cut adrift with traumatic circumstances. And at the same time, we're really questioning these New Thought teachings. And it's like, when you're cut adrift and you don't have sort of what's been your rock for 20, 30 years. It took us a while to get back on our feet, and
Yeah.
it took us a while and the idea of even doing a new thought practice was just not there for us. So, we experimented with sigils, we experimented with a lot of different things.
I think that's where all change comes from, right? Is adversity in a way. But it makes me think of, there's in Mitch's book and the Miracle Club, he brought up, that was one of the major points that really resonated with me. But also another thing was this idea of recidivism and this idea of just, being accountable for setbacks, for personal setbacks, not, maybe this is to put it pretty layman like, but don't be so hard on yourself.
Exactly. And then, if you're not wasting time trying to trace obsessively every single thought that might have led you to some misfortune or the other, and if you give up trying to control everything, then you can relax. You can say, okay, what worked, what didn't. Mitch is huge on experimentation. And in my life, it's like, oh no, give me concrete answers. Tell me what to do. I want, before I do anything, I want the map laid out.
Right.
This last 2 years, with my wife, we crossed the country in a van at an age when you normally, don't do van camping. Spent a year in Europe. We did some amazing things, and it was largely because of our willingness to let go of needing to have every single answer and just to experiment.
So what is that? Is there some kind of reverence to chaos that needs to be adhered to a bit in New Thought or beyond? Is there some idea that you're only responsible to a point and to, let the chips fall where they may?
That's really, Mitch, I think, to my mind, was the first to articulate that in the New Thought context. Yeah. And when I read his book, One Simple Idea, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, that's a new thought I can relate to. Yeah. Absolutely. So, to just briefly sort of touch on the articles, because a lot of it deals with sort of inner church workings. I don't want to bore people with that. But in New Thought, they train for 4 years what are called practitioners, and they're based on Christian Science practitioners, and their idea is they hold the truth of your divinity. They hold the truth that whatever it is your good is coming to you, and so they're trained. But they're also anything that gets drummed into them is that your reality and what happens to you and your circumstances begin and end in your consciousness. So you have these practitioners who trained for 4 years, who spent approximately $10,000 getting certified and licensed. And then these 3 people, and there's many more that have come forward, essentially they didn't have the money to tithe to the church for a while. They had illness, other difficult life circumstances. So this church, a minister called them in, and they all think, wow, they're reaching out, they want to help. Well, no, you've got 3 choices. You can give more money, you can attend a prosperity re-education camp, which is a horrendous insult to these people that have spent 4 years of their life studying. They know the message as well as anyone. Or third, you can essentially unlicense as a practitioner, and you're done as a practitioner. And these 3 people were traumatized. This is their dream. They wanted to help people. And suddenly, they're being told, they all gave tremendous service to these churches, showing up on Sundays, praying for people, helping out in other ways. Like that didn't even matter. That wasn't even on the radar. So that's when I heard the 3 of these stories, and initially I was a little reluctant to, because I was pissed and I wanted to run it. And I thought, oh my God, that everybody's so happy, positive in New Thought, and are they even going to listen, and so on. But eventually, just in the last couple of weeks, I put it out there, and the outpouring of people who've been similarly victimized. And in the first article, I didn't call it abuse, but I would call it absolutely religious abuse now, because these people were traumatized. And the response has been really overwhelming. And there are some early indications that some people in leadership roles are taking it seriously. My fingers are crossed. I hope this can create some real change. But
That's amazing. I had no idea that New Thought had the faculties of such. I still thought it was just kind of just this, uh, just this kind of literature-based, ideology in a way, which is funny. Growing up how I did, I just didn't know about such an infrastructure.
yeah, that came on board. I think Unity was among the first. Divine
Right.
Science, religious came a little bit later. Actually, religious science didn't become a full-blown denomination until I think late 50s, early 60s.
Right.
So, excuse me.
Maybe you can speak on a little bit of what these transgressions are, or what these practitioners are being held accountable for in that sort of way.
Essentially, as one of them was told, this person lost their job. They were laid off during the economic recession of 2008.
Right.
Called in, where's your giving? And so the person quite legitimately said, look, there's a recession, laid off. I'm doing the best I can. We're talking women post 50, very hard demographic to get a new job. And they were told, well, if you think the economy is the cause of your problem, you're not taking responsibility for your consciousness. It's not the economy. No outside circumstance. It's just your consciousness. And to tell that to somebody who's chronically ill or in very difficult life circumstances is just flat out abusive. I mean, it's blaming them for their misfortune.
Yeah, I agree. Do you see a disturbing trend in that sort of behavior currently?
It's still around. It's been around for years. I've heard from one minister who said that it's been, and Unity minister, not religious science, who said it's been in every church that he's ever belonged to. There was an absolutely amazing minister who lived and breathed the teachings at Mile High Church, and he ended up with what's that? Those stomach bugs. I can't think of the name of it right off, but E. coli. Nearly died. He absolutely amazed the nurses and hospital staff. As sick as he was, he lifted their spirits. I mean, that's how powerful this guy was. He gets back to church, and they have a little reception line at the end and shaking hands. And this congregant comes up to him and says, "What were you thinking to get that? What were you thinking to get sick?" And it's like, oh my God, how superficial, how idiotic. I mean,
dark. Yeah.
Yeah, this man, he had horrendous circumstances. He came through it, and he inspired the medical staff. What more do you want of a human being? I mean, really. I remember a piece of art I saw based on fortune when I was in Italy last year, and it was will fortune smile on me or will fortune not? Will I have good luck? Will I have bad luck? And that was the whole theme of the painting. And I thought, oh my God, that's fundamentally what religious science tries to answer, and New Thought tries to answer. It tries to say, if you get right with your consciousness, you're always going to have good luck. You are going to bat 1,000. You're going to have a great life. And it's not part of the human experience. It's absolutely not part of the human experience. And I think that to contrast that with like Rabbi Hoffman's teachings and the Jewish mysticism is, again, that's the world was made just for me. They've got that coin nailed, but what they don't have is the I am but dust and ashes. And it's you can, and New Thought teaches that you're a part of the divine. Mm-hmm. Jewish mysticism teaches you're a part of the divine, but you're also a fuck up, and so is everybody else, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking earlier today about, I think it was Jung that said, the measure of a man is how he reacts, right? Mm-hmm. How elastic is he about shit happening to him, because we're thrown into a world of chaos. And so
absolutely.
And so that's the positive mind metaphysics I totally get, because that should be a source code for how you're to navigate shit being thrown at you left and right.
Right. You don't control the events themselves, but you have
Right.
some control over how you respond.
Exactly. Yeah.
And there again, I think the chaos is such an important corrective because you know, again, you don't have the conceit that you can control everything.
Right. And I was going to just ask that. What facets of chaos magic really perked your ears up about working in conjunction with or helping New Thought?
Well, the first book I read was Gordon White's Chaos Chronicles.
Yeah. Chaos Protocols?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Chaos Protocols. And yeah, that it just page after page just blew me away.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, he was saying you can shape the odds. And he even came up with a interesting and plausible explanation for, you know, does prayer work or does magic work or working work? And he said, yeah, essentially they all work. It changes the odds. So he said, you know, and in his inimitable ways, like say, like you're going to a bar on Friday and you do a working to get laid, and you come home and you haven't gotten lucky. But he says, what happens? You know, he said, how can I say that every one of these things works, but it didn't happen? He says, well, maybe your odds went from 1 in 300 to 1 in 50.
Right.
So, and you know, it's like a somewhat crude example, but it could be applied to a lot of different things.
I mean, it makes sense. It almost seems repackaged isn't the right word, but it seems like these archetypal thoughts that are permeate within both, you know, that are working in different like praxis. You know, like one is maybe too full responsibility, but the other one is maybe too like result based, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. Except, you know, the thing is, the New Thought is. Are you saying New Thought is results based, or the Chaos Magic?
No, Chaos Magic. But
okay,
I think they would both.
They're kind of both because you know, like these practitioners that were drummed out. I mean, essentially, they were being accused of not getting the results that they should have.
Right.
So
I mean, yeah, that's deep and dark. You know, like with the Chaos Magic, my big grump as of late, I've let go because, you know, I'm a practitioner, but I'm still learning, and I'm going through different stages of what it means to me and the identity of such things. And Chaos Magic to me has kind of turned into more of a dogmatic idea than how I utilize it or how I think it should be, but that doesn't matter at the end of the day. You know?
Right.
Like
right.
that it doesn't matter. It is kind of whatever works for you. But that's what I mean. That's what the thing is maybe one is too dogmatic already and the other one's getting
kind of working there. Yeah. That could well be.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on, like, do you have any thoughts on implementing any chaos magic kind of protocols, or are there, I guess that would be a good question. Is it dogmatic? Do you know of certain, you know, practices that you would kind of put into New Thought in a way?
I think sigils for one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I had some, again, just before we went to Europe, my wife had a recurrence of really bad asthma. And it wasn't good for her. It wasn't good for, you know, the potential for the trip. And I was reading Chaos Protocols, and I thought, okay, let's put this to the test. So I created a couple of sigils, and I tried to keep them, you know, that, you know, because Gordon White also talks about, you know, doing things that increase the odds at each stage. So it's not like you're going for the whole enchilada. So I started out just that, you know, she received the help that she needed and created a sigil around that, as opposed to the New Thought approach, which would be she was expressing perfect health and so on.
Right.
And so I did that on a Wednesday, and then the Thursday, Friday, it was getting worse. But she connected with a home care nurse that she had known. Home care nurses get over here right away. Gave her a lot of valuable advice. And got her set up, and so that she was already improving by the time we got to the doctor on Monday.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it was, I totally credit the sigils with that, because how that unfolded, totally unplanned. Just heard from her out of the blue. She's like, "You get over here right away. I can help." It was absolutely awesome. And I think that goes to another thing. I mean, if we're talking about how these things work, I think another common new thought is that they say the law of attraction.
Right.
It's a law. You're a magnet, and it's being drawn to you. But if I look at the work of David Spangler, who lives up in Washington, he's done some amazing stuff.
Yeah.
And kind of looking at that too with Gordon White and all, and Mitch touched on this in one of his Medium pieces, is these sort of what New Thought would call manifestations come through everyday normal channels. Mm-hmm. And Spangler says, really what you're doing is you're less a magnet, and it's not so much the law of attraction, but you're stimulating channels for synchronicities to happen. Synchronicities are amazing. They don't always happen, but when they do, it's pretty cool. Yeah. So I think with what we call the law of attraction in New Thought, we're really talking about this sort of enhancing the potential for synchronicities. We're not talking about some ironclad law that reproduces every single thought you have.
Right.
I think the sigils and the chaos magic are better suited to work with kind of enhancing those synchronicities.
So what is the almost the ethereal come into play with you and your idea of what these systems kind of operate on? Is there a limit to, or a kind of woo, as I like to call it, like basis of things that you're dealing with, or your deities and I'm not saying that's too woo, but is it right. Is it just this pragmatic avenue where you're really just, because you're using ritualistic work, and it's focusing your mind, it's focusing your ideas, you're obviously going to have it in the forefront of your thoughts, you're obviously going to think about it more, you're obviously going to do it. Like, if that is too pragmatic, what to you is the biggest or the most woo it can go?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's probably both, and what I would have said 10 years ago and what I'd say now, because in a way I feel like I know far less now than I did 10 years ago.
Yep, that's the great work, right?
It's just a huge mystery. So I think one of the disappointments I had with Pete Carroll was, one, he's like, yeah, well, we do survive death for a while, and then when the energy just kind of dissipates and goes back into whatever. And he said he was basing that on his personal experience, that he had encountered entities after they had passed, of people he knew, but that was for a short time. And so that may be true for his experience, but I had a couple of transpersonal encounters with my father's spirit, 10, 15, 20 years after his passing. So, and again, I don't know. I mean,
you're saying he put a limit onto what the reverberation or the echo of a spirit.
Yeah. Or even if it's an echo, or if it's still an ongoing entity. And to my take,
too certain.
He was just too, he's like, this is what it is, and he was a little too dogmatic on that. I mean, I'm open. I mean, there could be other explanations from my experiences, but what I perceived was, a direct encounter of some type. And the other is that it seemed to me Carroll was relying so much on physics to explain everything, and so that it kind of ruled out the transcendent. So in a way, it's kind of like the worst of all worlds, because you get what you normally assume would be evidence of some unifying transpersonal force, but then you get it taken away from you at the same time and saying it's all explainable by quantum physics.
That's been my trouble with it, with those works and that, and like not Phil Hine to that much of a degree, but definitely with Pete Carroll, which is that it's the extremes of either or, explain both, kind of in a way that just, I don't. It seems too certain to me. It seems
exactly, and rigid. I think I prefer the openness of Dean Radin and Mitch and some other people. And again, I've had some experiences that I think, to the best interpretation that I have of those experiences, it suggests that there's certainly more than just the enhanced synchronicities. I think that's a part of the picture, but I think there are mystical realms, beyond that.
So you have had personal kind of trans-dimensional wayfaring, as I like to call it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
At different times, and there's people that are far more consistent with those experiences than I've had. But I mean, I've had my share of both that and the more garden variety psychic kinds of things, but nothing equivalent to my dad, certainly.
What do you think because this brings me to the point of what practical mysticism is? Or I was listening to these lectures by William Meader, I think, from the Theosophical Society.
Not familiar.
Yeah, it was pretty great. He does a thing on esoteric astrology and just fun to listen to, but his thing is about the importance of this, getting back into the practical mysticism. And I think I see that to a degree, but I also see it taken into this almost consumer, aspect of it. I'm finding a lot of spirituality used, or occultism, quote unquote, used as trends and stuff, and more of an aesthetic. And I wanted to know, like, how do you see the future of this fight, of like this great work? Like, how do we elevate this beyond just
the commercial?
Yeah.
Boy, so that's a really good question. It's an interesting question. I mean, we're saying like now, like you can get witchcraft kits at
everything's a hashtag.
Urban Safari or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's been a constant battle, because I think back to the 80s. Since so much New Age stuff was commercialized,
right?
And the crystals and that. I don't know. I think as a starting point, it's not necessarily a terrible thing, but there comes a point. I always say, like, if spiritual growth was all love and light, a lot more people would be doing it. But it's like you've got unhealed childhood wounds, past life stuff, probably, at least from my perspective, all kinds of things to deal with, and just even with your personality. I mean, there's a great story about 4 rabbis in the Talmud who went into high mystical consciousness, and sort of the first guy, he got up there and it's like, oh man, this is just like so totally cool. I don't want to go back. There's no pain up here. I'm staying. And so he died on the spot. And then another of the guys is like, he's up there and he's like, oh my God, I'm just a total shitbag. I can see my entire thing here, and it's just all so dark. And so he came back and he started, doing every wrong thing, every dark thing, because, he thought, so I've worked so hard and I thought I was perfect, and I'm not. And then only Rabbi Akiva came out unscathed. And in Rabbi Hoffman's interpretation, it's like, we're all a mixed bag, we're good, we're bad, this, that, the other. And it takes that higher awareness, it takes that taste of the transcendent to be able to look back without judgment, and then to have that gap that the Hindus sometimes talk about, that gap that you can slide into, the observed consciousness, where you can make choices and not be driven by your impulses, or looking at your impulses, being frightened, having to be perfect, having to be good. Instead, sure, you can make more intelligent choices. And I mean, that's the piece, I think, the commercial spirituality piece, the commercialization of it can never tap.
Yeah.
You can play with the edges and the fun stuff and wave a wand around or whatever floats your boat. But if you're really going to go deep, if you're really going to do what you're terming the great work, I mean, you've got to grow some cojones and be able to look at the full range of who you are, the good and the bad, and work and make the best choices you can.
So this is a two-part question then from that.
Mm-hmm.
Where does one start? Where does one start diving in? And not just, meditation or, was another common, kind of answer to this is like meditation or, reading or like reading, but a pragmatic way for one to jump in. And then how does that relate to what is the initial start for, or the initial tenet of New Thought? And do you see a divide in that, or do you share that same entry point still?
Okay, so the theory behind New Thought would be that you come in, you find out you have some control over your life, you get the parking place, you get the unexpected money, and then you'll want to dive deeper.
Right.
And
it's like baiting you in a way.
Yeah, and kind of bait and switch, and oh, surprise, now you're in deep spirituality. And it's true for some people into it. I won't say it isn't, but a lot of people stay stuck at the manifesting the parking place level. So that doesn't always work. In my own case, I mean, I was probably kind of stuck there. But in my early 20s, I had some past life flashbacks that were pretty traumatic, and it's not something I go into in any great detail.
Sure.
It can still trigger me to this point, but it was like sort of like getting my ball squeezed in a vice. And so in my own case, that's what pushed me deeper to, maybe for the next 20 years. I pretty much lived like a monk and explored deeply because I had to.
Yeah.
And to be absolutely truthful, absent that, I might have stayed at the surface. So I don't know that I can, you've almost got to have, I could be wrong here, but I mean, and I'm not like bragging, saying like I'm the, super deepest guru ever at all, but it just seems you've got to have a pretty serious prompt to really undertake the serious heavy duty great work kind of stuff.
I guess my question is a bit about the last one, or right before the last one too, is like, what is that practice that one would need to jump into to kind of go past the consumer aspect or the trend aspect, the one daily kind of thing that will show kind of a devotion to the craft or devotion to this method?
I would, and there's probably different versions of this, but I would say what we're doing right now, and not making it such a solitary thing, and
that's interesting.
The rabbi always talks about, the solitary mystic mode.
Yeah.
Versus a more communal mode. And I think it's a communal mode. I mean, I've got a good friend of mine, my wife, different people that I can go really deep with. And they'll challenge me, I'll challenge them. Because we all have perspectives. And that's the beauty of the Talmud or Torah classes. I mean, it's like everyone has unique gifts. Everyone has a unique perspective. It takes all those unique perspectives. And it's not about trying to build a false unity, but it's about in smushing differences, but it's about honoring differences. So like you're putting together a puzzle piece. So I don't know, for me, I think it's always been, I've got one foot in Buddhism, one foot in Jewish mysticism, one foot in New Thought. Now, I've got a toe in chaos magic. And just to be, and you can kind of approximate that, I guess, as an individual, because you can look at these deep questions that you have and then say, okay, let's see where Gordon White comes in. Let's see where Rabbi Akiva comes in. Let's see where Ernest Holmes or Joel Goldsmith comes in on this question, and then just allow all those ideas to just get in there and kind of play around. And then the extension of that is to, maybe pursuing different paths or people you feel that you can be open with, and just have those really deep conversations, because I find over time, they really create openings. And inevitably, and if you allow yourself to be challenged, you're not gonna just get the wand kit from Urban Safari, and that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
No, I love that. I mean, usually I always hear that it starts solitary, like I haven't heard what I think was my motivating factor for all of this was, to glean more, to listen more, to learn more from people. And to me, that's, my own kind of work or processes with it, or process
Hmm.
with it.
Oh yeah, I can absolutely see that. And I think another area, and it's one that my wife and I really got into when we were in Europe, but art, museums.
Yeah.
Again, that widening of a perspective. And again, to go back to Jewish mysticism, there's this idea that a spouse is a helpmate against. And what are they, why do you want to marry a helpmate against? But it's a helpmate against the narrow view. In other words, you want that gift of those wider perspectives.
Right.
And art and the arts, you catch a glimpse of your soul in responding to it. You catch a glimpse of the artist's soul, their perspective, how they see the sort of eternal problems that humans have always struggled with. Why is there suffering? Why do bad things happen to good people? So to spend some time in museums, going to challenging films, different things like that.
I love that. I mean, especially this day and age, it's so good to hear to, challenge your thought, challenge your stationary existence almost in a way,
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's been my biggest MO. What's in the future for you, Mr. Bishop? What do you have coming up? What's going on in your world today?
Well, we just got back from Europe in January, and it's we're trying to figure out where life's taking us next.
Yeah, so you relocated to Colorado or went back to Colorado?
Yeah, we were in the San Luis Valley, a beautiful place called Crestone, and it's kind of spiritual land. They've got Zen Buddhist centers, they've got several Tibetan Buddhist centers, a Catholic monastery. I mean, it's like this huge international religious spiritual type place.
Wow.
It's UFOs, you get that thrown in there, and then supposedly a huge energy vortex, which I think
my father lives in Parker.
Oh, okay. That's kind of
Black
south of
Forest.
Denver. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, area. But he's the one that kind of I blame for bringing me into this mess.
Yeah. It can feel like that at times.
Yeah.
So we were there, and it was awesome, but it was a little bit isolating, and we had some other issues in family and stuff we had to attend to here. So we're back in Denver, and so it's like, where do we travel next? What do we do? I don't know. So last few years we've kind of felt our way along. So like that movie with Indiana Jones, where the step only appears after he puts his foot out over the abyss.
Yeah.
So we're getting kind of used to living that way.
God, that's a metaphor for the great work, I feel.
Yeah, exactly. So we're getting our blogs back up and running. They've kind of been on hiatus. I've got a blog, or not a blog, but an anthology of the blog with some writing by Mitch and some other really cool people. And
like Royce.
Yeah, Royce.
His writing on the meme stuff was so good on your blog. I love that article.
And so looking forward to his second and third installments.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. Yeah. I need to have him on as well.
So we'll have the anthology out on new directions and new thought, kind of hopefully pointing the way of a lot of people that are taking some new perspectives on it. And so that's going to be coming. My wife and I both have some other books in the works. And from there.
That's awesome. And just real quick, how did harvbishop.com kind of be the hub for a lot of this?
Again, it was totally unplanned. Yeah, it was. I was ranting about something. My wife ran in the park, and I was ranting about how New Thought needed to kind of reboot itself. And she was like, you really should write a blog. And normally I just like, okay, I move slowly. I might have thought about it for a year for some reason, and I just, to this date, I don't know why. I went home, read how to start a blog, and started it 3 days later. And
it has been a sword.
And then Mitch, I had interviewed him for Science of Mind magazine, and there was a lot of outtakes, so many good things. And so I ran one of his articles on, why law of attraction was kind of outdated, and it generated such a huge response, a huge outpouring, that the original vision for the blog went by the wayside. And people said, my daughter was blamed for the death of her child, her baby, different stories like that. And I thought, oh my God, this is just over time, instead of being what I had originally intended, sort of the kind of more deep conversations we've been having. And I want to get back to that a little bit, but it took on a life of its own. And Mitch had some outstanding contributions, many other people as well. And it's really become a forum for an opportunity to rethink new thought. As one guy said, he says it's time for new thought to allow thinking again.
Yeah, new thought.
Yeah, exactly.
And last question, Diane's doing okay? You guys are good?
Yeah, we're good. We're doing good. So
awesome.
We're ready to rock and roll.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much, Harv. I really appreciate your time.
Enjoyed talking to you, Keats.
Yeah. Let us not have this be the last time.
That'd be awesome. Really appreciate it.